ready, you're good to go ahead and explain to the class how to do the bell ringer.
Okay, so I noticed that the side missing would go under the C squared. So if I got the formula, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And I did 3 squared plus 7 squared equals X squared. Got 9 plus 49 equals X squared. And I got 58 equals X squared. So I squared 3 and I got X is approximately 7.6.
Thank you. Brett, tell us, do you agree or disagree?
Right.
Okay, perfect. And it didn't tell you exactly what to round to, so you could have left it as 7.6. Is it 7.63? Did anyone round it 2 decimal places? Okay, so that would be 7.62. Or you could have also rounded to 8. The only reason I would not recommend rounding to 8 is because you might mistake it for a Pythagorean triple, and it's not because you had to round. If you have to round, it's not a Pythagorean triple. All right, what questions do you have on the bell ringer? All right, you can go ahead and put your bell ringer away, get out your notes. Don't forget, you have a homework assignment on quizzes tonight. It's due in the beginning of class tomorrow. You will need to show your work on paper and turn it in when you're finished. Or turn it in at the beginning of class tomorrow. It should already be posted to Google Classroom. Alright, 10.2, special right triangles. It says students will be able to find side lengths and special right triangles. So what this does is it just shows us a shortcut on how to find a side length instead of having to go through all the work of using Pythagorean theorem. You can use these shortcuts, but it only works with special right triangles. And there's 2 types of special right triangles. Also, if you have these special right triangles memorized, it makes trig a lot easier, and we'll be getting into trig in the next section. So, and it helps you with the unit circle if you plan on taking any upper level math classes, or if you have to take college algebra, wherever you go, or any kind of math class in college. Knowing these triangles, having them memorized will help you in those classes as well. It makes them a lot easier. Alright, it says find the length of the hypotenuse of the 45, 45, 90 triangle. So what this 45, 45, 90 triangle means is that this is a right angle and each of these are 45 degrees. Okay, so it's an isosceles triangle. So this side has a length of 1 and that side has a length of 1. Okay. Alright, so my question to you is, how would I go about finding the length of the hypotenuse C? What would I do? Grace, what would you tell me to do?
1 squared plus 1 squared equals C squared.
Perfect. 1 squared plus 1 squared equals C squared. Okay. So my next question, what is 1 squared, Lincoln? 1. So it would be 1 plus 1 equals C squared. And now the trickiest question in math, what's 1 plus 1? 2. So 2 equals C squared. And how do I get rid of that square? You square root it. So we square root both sides, and we want our answer to be exact. So all of these answers in this section need to be exact. That means do not put it in decimal. So don't do a decimal. So the square root of 2 equals C squared. So we type in the square root of 2 equals C. And to simplify square root, you find factors of 2 that are perfect squares. Well, factors of 2 are only 1 and 2, and neither of them are a perfect square. So that's your answer, the square root of 2. So this hypotenuse would be the square root of 2. And that's the exact answer. We do not want to round it. All right, so what if these triangles are isosceles triangles. Notice these two sides are congruent, so this is an isosceles right triangle. This is an isosceles right triangle. This is an isosceles right triangle. If you know it's a right triangle, you know it's isosceles, what are these two angles going to be? They're going to be 45. What about these two angles? And what about these two? Okay, what do we know about triangles that all three angles are congruent to each other? Like this is 90, 45, 45, 90, 45, 45, 90, 45, 45. They're not congruent, but they're what? What do we just take a test number? What was chapter 9 about? Starts with an S. Similar triangles. All isosceles right triangles are similar. Okay? That means every time you have an isosceles right triangle, their sides are proportional. So what that means is, if this side here is 2, and this side is 1, and this side's 1, what's this side here going to be? 2. Because 1 times 2 is 2, 1 times 2 is 2. What about if this one was 4? What's this one going to be? Okay. So I can just multiply it. Okay, so this one here, I already know, you already told me that this is the square root of 2. What's the scale factor from 1 to 2, from this little triangle to the big one? What do you have to multiply this one by to get to the big one? 2. So you multiply all three sides by 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 2 is 2. How would I find this side? What would I do? 2 times the square root of 2. And that's already simplified, so that would be 2 times the square root of 2. Okay. What do you think this side's going to be? What if I had an isosceles triangle? Let's say this side here is 10. What's my hypotenuse going to be? 10 times the square root of 2. So if you have an isosceles right triangle, you know these two sides are going to be the same. And you know you just multiply the side by the square root of 2 to get your hypotenuse. That's all you got to do. You don't have to actually go through and do all that work. So you wouldn't have to do 4 squared plus 4 squared equals c squared. 16 plus 16 equals c squared. 32 equals c squared. Take the square root of 32. And a factor of 32 that's a perfect square would be 16. So that would be 16 times 2. And the square root of 16 is 4. So that's 4 times the square root of 2. Okay, notice I didn't have to go through and do all that work. All I had to do was do 4 times the square root of 2. Alright, so that brings us to the rule. The 45, 45, 90 degree triangle rule says, in a 45, 45, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is the square root of 2 times as long as each leg. Okay, so make sure you fill that in the missing blank up there at the top. In a 45, 45, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is the square root of 2 times as long as each leg. Okay, so for instance, on an isosceles triangle, each of the sides are x. The hypotenuse is x times the square root of 2. So whatever x is, you just plug it in. So if x is 5, you would have 5, 5, 5 square roots of 2. If x is 20, 20, 20, 20 square roots of 2. And there's a formula you can use right below that triangle. It says the hypotenuse equals the leg, the length of the leg, times the square root of 2. Okay, so write that formula in there. That'll help you remember. And this works for any 45, 45, 90 triangle. All right, before I do an example, what questions do you have for me so far? Okay, let's do an actual example. It says, find the value of x, write your answer in simplest form. Simplest form means exact. It means do not round it, do not put it in a decimal. So this is a 90-degree triangle, and this side's 45, so that makes, so if I do 90 plus 45, that's 135, 180 minus 135 is 45. So automatically know this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle, which means these two sides are congruent. So they would both be 8. And then this side here is my hypotenuse. Okay. And I know that my hypotenuse equals the length of the leg times the square root of 2. Well, the length of a leg is 8, so my hypotenuse is 8 square roots of 2. And there you go. I did not have to go through and do all that, use the Pythagorean theorem. I didn't have to do it because of the formula, since it's a special right triangle. All right, let's do the next one. Make sure you fill in the missing number. There's a missing side that I whited out. Make sure you fill that in first before we actually do it. It says find the value of x, right triangular in simplest form. The missing side is 5 times the square root of 2. X is a leg. Well, I know that the hypotenuse equals the leg times the square root of 2. Now, the difference in this one is they give you the hypotenuse rather than a leg. So they gave me the hypotenuse. So I would plug that in for the hypotenuse. I would do 5 square roots of 2 equals the leg here is x. So I would say x times the square root of 2. So 5 square roots of 2 equals x times the square root of 2. Notice the difference here. Ooh. How am I going to solve for x? What would I do? Taylor, what would you tell me to do to solve for x?
I'm not sure.
Well, if it was 2x equals 5 square roots of 2, what would you do?
Oh, is that right? I'm not sure.
You do the opposite. What's the opposite? 2x means 2 times x. What's the opposite of multiplying?
5.
You would divide. So here you're doing x times the square root of 2, so what would I do? What did you just tell me is the opposite of multiplying? It's dividing. So to get rid of the square root of 2, you would divide both sides by the square root of 2. These cancel. What happens to these two? Square root of 2 divided by square root of 2. What? They cancel. So all you have is 5 equals x. Now, does it make sense that if the hypotenuse is the leg times the square root of 2, does it not make, and if the hypotenuse is 5 times the square root of 2, does it make sense that this would be 5?
Yeah.
Oh, this would be 5 times the square root of 2. All right, let's try another one. Again, you need to fill in the missing side. The tricky part here is knowing if they're giving you the leg or the hypotenuse. All right, so fill in that missing side first. 2 square roots of 2. All right, so my question for you is, did they give me a leg or did they give me the hypotenuse? Nick, what would you say?
They gave us the
Yeah, they gave you the hypotenuse. Okay, so the hypotenuse equals a leg times the square root of 2. And the 2 square roots of 2, Bailey, where would I plug that in for? The hypotenuse or the leg? Yeah, the hypotenuse. So I get 2 square roots of 2 equals the leg is x times the square root of 2. Alright, so Maddie, what would I do here to get rid of that square root of 2? Divide. Perfect. And Natalie Drew, what do you get when you do 2 square roots of 2 divided by the square root of 2? 2 equals x. All right, before you try one with your partner, what questions do you have for me? Okay. All right, so first thing you're going to do is fill in the missing number, and then you and your partner are going to work this one out together. It says find the value of the variable, right write your answer in simplest form. So the two sides are the square root of 2, and then that one side is y.
Maybe it's something like this. How do we do that one?
And whenever you're multiplying radicals, you can multiply them together. Just type in your calculator what you have and see what answer it gives you. And y'all have the perfect calculators for this.
We do?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know where to start. I'm trying to see this. And I got the other one.
Okay, so write your formula down. It's hypotenuse equals leg times square root of 2. Okay, now, did they give you the hypotenuse or did they give you the legs?
The leg, yeah.
Okay, so plug that into your formula, and what would you plug in for hypotenuse?
Why?
There you go. Okay, now type that in your calculator. What's the square root of 2 times the square root of 2? There you go.
Oh, really?
This is the square root of 2 times the square root of 2, so this would be the square root of 2 squared. Okay, so type in your calculator the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. Now that should be in, because it's, if you look at your thing, it is leg times the square root of 2. So your leg is the square root of 2, and you multiply by the square root of 2, and you get the square root of 2. Now,
Yeah, it's almost like if it's 2 down here, it's the square root of 2. If it's 2 up here, then it's just 2. It's the
no, it's
opposite.
just 2. Okay. Now you since you plugged in the square root of 2 for your leg, you need to erase the leg word because you plugged in the square root of 2 for that. And then type in your calculator the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. All right, if I could have your attention, please. On this one, y is your hypotenuse. So whenever you plug this into your formula, hypotenuse equals the leg times the square root of 2. The hypotenuse is y, and the length of a leg is the square root of 2. So you have the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. Well, anytime you multiply a radical times a radical, you just multiply the numbers inside together and put that number under a radical. 2 times 2 is 4. So that would be the same as the square root of 4. And what's the square root of 4? 2. So your answer is y equals 2. Anytime you have a radical and you multiply it by itself, you're pretty much canceling out the radical. So for instance, if I had the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, that's the same as the square root of 3 squared. Well, the radical and the exponent cancel each other out, so my answer is just 3. Same thing if I were to have the square root of 1,234 times the square root of 1,234, your answer would just be 1,234. Okay, so anytime you multiply the exact same two radicals together, it just cancels out the radicals, and you get the number that's underneath the radical. Square root of 10 times the square root of 10 is going to be 10. All right, let's try the next one. Find the value of the variable and write your answer in simplest form. You got to pay attention to whether or not they gave you the leg or the hypotenuse. Make sure you fill in the two missing sides.
This would be x. X equals 7. So just like x equals 7. Alright. Is that 7?
This is the measurement angle. This is just telling you that this is a 90, 45, 45 triangle.
I just used a formula. All you do is plug
You
it
just leave it in
So like
simplest
we got the
terms,
X.
like we did on the front. Yep, so it would just be 7 square roots of 2.
in. And the formula is 1.7. Yeah, that doesn't make more sense.
It's X, so. But the formula is.
Oh, wait, that's not. It's very hot here.
Alright, let's go ahead and turn your desk back around. On this one here, I really like the explanations. I was listening to the explanations, and that's exactly what group work is for, so you can help them out, show them how to do it. And I always like using the formulas because it helps me keep everything in order. So hypotenuse equals leg times the square root of 2. Well, your hypotenuse is x. So I put x equals, and the leg is 7. Now, how do you tell which one's your hypotenuse? How do you know?
It's opposite of 90 degrees.
Yeah, it's opposite of the right angle. Okay, and then 7 times the square root of 2, that's already simplified, so you just get x equals 7 square roots of 2. Okay, and so that's your answer. All right, before we move on to chunk 2, what questions do you have for me? Okay, all right, so this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Now, it's not always going to say, hey, look at this 45, 45, 90 triangle. You're going to have to look at it and be able to determine, is it a 45, 45, 90 triangle? The way to tell is if it gives you a 90-degree angle, and it either has to give you one of these saying it's 45, or something has to be telling you that it's isosceles. Okay, so like if this 45-degree angle wasn't here, they would have had to have 7 on both of these sides, or they would have had to have a mark congruent. So you have to be able to tell that it's a 45, 45, 90 triangle somehow. Now, here's the other special right triangle. It's a 30, 60, 90 triangle. Okay, so we're on chunk 2. It says, in a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is twice as long as the shorter leg, and the longer leg is the square root of 3 times as long as the shorter leg. And then if you look right there at your triangle, I have those sides whited out, so you need to fill in the sides. Opposite of the 30-degree angle is your x, that's your shorter leg. The hypotenuse is 2 times x. And the longer leg, that's opposite of the 60-degree angle, that's x times the square root of 3. So the bottom side is not always going to be the longer leg. Okay? You have to be able to tell which one's the short leg, the long leg, and the hypotenuse. Okay? In just a moment, after we write the formulas down, I will show you a method that I took a trig in college, like my junior year of college, just because I knew I'd be teaching it, and this is the trick she showed me, so I will show you. But after we write down the formulas, to find the hypotenuse is the shorter leg times 2. It's important that if you use the shorter leg. The shorter leg is always opposite the 30-degree angle. The hypotenuse is the shorter leg times 2. And the longer leg is the shorter leg times the square root of 3. So in order to find the hypotenuse and the longer leg, you just need to know the shorter leg. Or if you know the hypotenuse, you can plug it in and find the shorter leg. Once you know the shorter leg, then you can find the longer leg. You only need one side. Once you have that one side, you can find the other 2. Okay, so let me show you what my professor showed me. Okay, so here's my 60-degree, there's my 90, there's my 30. Start with your smallest side. Remember with 45, 45, 90, it was 1, 1, square root of 2. So I always just remember 1, 1, square root of 2, and then I just multiply it whatever I need to. With this one, the one opposite the 30 is the 1. The hypotenuse is 2, and this is 3. 1, 2, 3, but put a square root over the 3. So you just count 1, 2, 3, put a square root over the 3. And how I know which one's 2? 2 is bigger than the square root of 3, and the hypotenuse is always the longest side. So you got 1, 1, 2, but you make the square root of 2. And then with a 30, 60, 90, it's always 1, 2, square root of 3. So like 1, 2, 3, you put a square root over the 3. And the hypotenuse is always the longer side. If you have that memorized and that memorized, it's going to make trig a lot easier. Because we have to start doing ratios. And if you know it's a 30, 60, 90, you don't even have to like find the lengths of the sides. You just have to have that part memorized. Alright, so does everyone have their formulas? Alright, so let's do an example. Find the values of x and y. Write your answer in simplest form. Okay. So what I would do first is I would figure out which sides are which. Like, is it my shorter leg, my longer leg, or my hypotenuse? Well, here's my 90-degree angle, so that means this side here, y, is automatically my hypotenuse. Here's my 30-degree angle, that's the smallest angle, so that means this is the smallest side, so that's my shorter leg. And then this one's opposite the 60-degree angle, so this one's my longer leg. Okay, so I would do that first. I would label those first. Okay, and then it says your hypotenuse is equal to the shorter leg. Are y'all okay if I just put SL for shorter leg? Is your shorter leg times 2. I can't do that one yet because my shorter leg's X. And then it says my longer leg, instead of me putting SL, let me just put short. Is your short leg times the square root of 3. Okay. I would do this one first because it's easier. However, they're both variables, so I can't really do that one first. So let's use the longer leg. The longer leg's 9, so we're going to use this formula here first. So for the longer leg, I do 9 equals, my shorter leg is x times the square root of 3. Now this is x times the square root of 3, so to get rid of the square root of 3, I divide by the square root of 3. Now, here's the tricky part. Here's the part where you cover it more in Algebra 2. You do not want to have a radical in the bottom of your fraction, so we have to get rid of it. So if you recall earlier, remember how I told you that if you had the square root of 2 and you multiplied it by the square root of 2, it just gives you 2? Well, we're going to do the same thing here. But this is the square root of 3. So we're going to multiply it by the square root of 3 to get rid of that radical. But you can't just multiply one side by a radical. You have to do the top and the bottom. So I've got to multiply 9 times the square root of 3 and the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. Well, 9 times the square root of 3 is just 9 square roots of 3 over square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3 equals, these cancel, x. Now, what you got to check for is if these two numbers can simplify, the 9 and the 3. So type in your calculator 9 divided by 3 and tell me what you get. 3. So 9 divided by 3 is 3, so you get 3 times the square root of 3 equals x. So this shorter side is gonna be 3 square roots of 3. Let me get a different color. 3 square roots of 3 is the shorter side. That's x. Okay. Then it says your hypotenuse is your shorter leg times 2. So my hypotenuse is y, and my shorter leg is 3 square roots of 3. And I multiply that by 2. Okay. Well, when you have a number that has a radical and you multiply it by a number, all you do is multiply the number in the front. Okay. So like 7 times the square root of 2 was just 7 square roots of 2. Well, 3 square roots of 3 times 2, you do 3 times 2, which is 6, and you get y equals 6 times the square root of 3. You pretty much treat your radical like it's a variable, unless you multiply it by another radical. So this hypotenuse would be 6 square roots of 3. Alright, the 30, 60, 90 can be a little bit trickier than the 45, 45, 90. So before I ask you if you have any questions, let's do another example. That way you have 2 examples to go off of, and then we'll see what questions you have. Alright, so first fill in your missing sides. It says find the value of the variable, write your answer in simplest form. Alright, so they gave you 2 sides. You need to figure out what 2 sides they gave you. Was it the hypotenuse, the short leg, or the long leg? Alright, so here's your 90-degree angle. So that means this is your hypotenuse. So they didn't give us the hypotenuse. You've got to figure out which one. So they gave you the short leg and the long leg. So figure out which one's which. Brett, which one would you say is the short leg? Why is this one the short leg? Yeah, it's across from the 30. So that one's the short leg, and X is the long leg. So now go back to your formula, the one that says longer leg, and tell me what that formula is, Bailey.
So the longer one,
Yes, what's the formula of the long leg?
longer leg equals short,
So the longer leg equals short times the square root of 3. Okay. Now, what do I plug in for the longer leg, Lincoln? Equals. What about for the short leg, Sydney?
square root of 3.
So square root of 3 times the square root of 3. Anybody know what this answer is without even typing it in your calculator? 3. So x equals 3. Okay, now that we've done 2 problems, what questions do you have for me? Okay. What if it asked you for the hypotenuse? How would I find the hypotenuse, Taylor?
Use shorter leg.
The shorter leg times 2? Well, my shorter leg is the square root of 3, so that would mean my hypotenuse would be square root of 3 times 2, which is just 2 square roots of 3. If they were to ask you for the hypotenuse. Alright, let's do another example. Fill in those missing numbers. You've got 4 on each side, so it looks like an isosceles triangle, and then each of these sections are 2. What type of triangle would this be? What's going to be the total length of this side? 4. So you have a triangle that has 4, 4, and 4. What type of triangle is that? Equilateral. So what do I know all 3 of these angles are going to be? They're all 3 going to be 60. Okay. Well, that one's 90, so that makes this angle 60. Well, if this whole entire angle is 60, what's this part here going to be? 30. So forget about this side of your triangle. You have a 90, 60, 30 triangle. This side here is 2, this side is 4, and they want you to find H. So if I was you, I would redraw it without this part over here, because this part over here is just trying to confuse you. Draw it as one triangle. So you have a 4, an H, and a 2, and you're trying to find H. So this is a 30, 60, 90. Okay. So you got to figure out what type of side H is. Nick, would you say that H would be your hypotenuse, your short leg, or your long leg?
H would be your long leg.
Why? How can you tell?
It's opposite. Something.
The 60. Well, 2 is opposite of your 30, and H is opposite of 60. So we know from chapter 9 that H would be bigger because it's opposite of your ankle. Okay, so H is the long leg. All right. So Natalie Bolin, which formula will I use to find H? Yeah, because your long leg equals the shorter leg times the square root of 3. Okay. Natalie Sells, what do I plug in for long leg? Equals short leg. Abby, what do I plug in for the short leg? 2 times the square root of 3. Can I do anything to simplify this? No. So it's just H equals 2 times the square root of 3. And if you notice, your hypotenuse is 2 times the shorter leg. Well, the shorter leg's 2. 2 times 2 is 4. No, this is 4. All right, before you try the next question with your partner, what question do you have for me? All right, try this one with your partner. Find the value of x and y. Write your answer in simplest form. So you need to plug in 9x and y, and then work this one out with your partner. You need to find x and y. Yep.
I need to find the other one.
Yep. Now you gotta find y.
Okay, so I need to find. That is
shorter leg times
wait, what? Short?
short leg times 2.
Nine times 2.
No, because the square root of 3, there it 3 it only has factors 1 and 3, and neither is the perfect square. So that would be your answer. The only time you're really going to change the radical is if you multiply it by another radical. So like if you did the square root of 3 times the square root of 2, you get the square root of 1. Or if you did the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, you get 3. Alright, so I can have your attention, please. On this one, for x, you should have gotten 9 times the square root of 3. And for y, you should have gotten 18. Would anyone like to see either of those worked out? Okay, so this one's 30, so that makes this angle 60. So that makes 9 my short leg. and X my long leg. Okay, and then Y is my hypotenuse. Okay, so to find Y, your hypotenuse equals your short leg times 2. Well, my hypotenuse is Y, and my short leg is 9, so Y equals 9 times 2, so Y equals 18. Okay. And then your longer leg equals the short leg times the square root of 3. Well, my longer leg is X, and my short leg is 9, so you get 9 times the square root of 3, and you don't have to do anything. It's already in simplified form. Alright, try this one with your partner. And then once I check this one and tell you you're good, you can get your stuff ready. And then don't forget you have a homework assignment on quizzes.
How many is it? How to start? Sorry. Okay. It's be the same thing. So long equals short times